שבוע טוב.
שבוע טוב ותודה רבה לך. It's very kind of you. Very kind of you.
The more the merrier. I mean, it's for all.
צריך להודות במקום שצריך להודות. זהו.
כן.
אני את זה למדתי בחיים. מה שלומך ככה? איך החיים? איך העניינים? משתעממים, אה? כולנו ברוך השם, אבל זה קשה מאוד, כל ההסגר הזה.
כן, אני מבינה את זה.
אני משתגע לנסוע לישראל. Who is the gentleman at the bottom? Nava?
No, that's Ellie. You're on mute, Ellie.
Now I got renamed. Shavua Tov.
Mute.
Okay.
Shavua Tov.
So I brought with me Dr. Saban.
Okay, welcome, Dr. Saban.
You're breaking up, Dr. Saban.
Okay, Yofi.
I think we're going to wait 2 minutes. We're going to say for 6 o'clock. So
yeah.
We'll all stay patient.
So what did you do with the siyum?
We didn't make a siyum in the end. Sorry, thanks for
texting. We still haven't?
There was a lot of discomfort, I think. Well, not a lot. There's 5 people, right? A couple of them were uncomfortable about doing an in-person siyum, I think.
Okay. So
I wasn't one of them, but
I know. I'm not either. I mean, I thought that
I'm respectful.
Yeah. Each one has their level of comfort.
100%. So we didn't end up doing it. So
yeah. Okay. I mean, we did a Zoom siyum at RJC, and that's what most people did.
Yeah, no, I was hoping we could do something Hanukkah, maybe. It's a shame. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that would be good if people actually agree to it.
Right. So we'll see. We'll see what people say.
Okay.
1 minute here.
Where is everybody? So what did he get up to?
I think you should start in Vav Amud Bet, no? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, no?
I'm happy to start there, but he got way beyond that apparently.
Oh wow! Okay, we're not that far by us.
So let's start there because no one else is here, so we can start Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
It's around 10 lines, 12 lines from the bottom of Vav Amud Bet. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. The person who does bedika at night, like you have to do it, after the bedika, you have to do bitul, which is our text, Ho chamira v'chamia, dika b'reshuti, delo yadana, etc. Levatel lahavi kefker da'ara. Okay, and there's different girsaot in the Rishonim, but that's all the Gemara says that you have to do bitul. My timer, why do you have to be mevatel? If it's because after you check, there are probably still bits and pieces left on the bottom. Halo chashivi. Who cares? They don't count. They're basically hefker, right? You might say that because even though they're not chashuv, the fact that you care about them with the house makes them chashuv. But Tanya, we have a braita. I'm going to read this quickly because it's review. Sufei te'enim. Let's say you have in your field these sufei te'enim literally means the leftover, the end of the crop of the te'enim. Okay, so you harvest your te'enim. There's a few left on the vines or on the tree that are bad. They're bad quality. You don't care about them. You left them behind. So in theory, your son that would be hefker. You wouldn't mind if people came in and took them. However, you're mishamer sedeh with novim. You are protecting your field because there's grapes there that you don't want people to come and get. Or let's say you have sufei novim. The same thing. You have the leftover grapes. Hanan, we're doing real quickly from the daf Vav Amud Bet. Okay, a little review. Right? You watch the field because you still have gourds, you still have the pumpkins growing in the field. So says the Braita, if the Baal Bait cares about these things, right, then other people cannot take them. They're chayav if you take them with maaser. If the Baal Bait takes them because they're his or hers, you're chayav in maaser and you're asur mishum gezel. בזמן שאין בעל הבית מקפיד עליהם, מותרים משום גזל. If the Baal Bait does not care about them, then they are mutar mishum gezel, meaning people can come and take it. Upatur mishum maaser, because hefker is patur and maaser. So presumably, if you care about people coming in, then it's no longer, it shouldn't be, it's even though you care about the field, right? Because you care about your house in this case, you don't want people coming into your house. If you don't care about the object, which in that case is the leftover grapes, and in this case is the drops of chametz on the floor, the Braita makes it sound like it's hefker. So why do you have to be mevatel? You know, if you have pieces, so what? Even if it's in your house, it's still hefker. Says the Gemara, Amir Rava, Gzeira Shema Yinsad Kuska Yafe V'data Alayu. We're worried that you are going to find a juicy piece, right? You forgot. And Rashi understands that this means that you, even though you searched, you didn't find it. So it's in the corner or it's in the cabinet, right? So you're gonna find a good, nice donut, let's say, you know, and we're afraid that even though you searched, you're gonna find this thing and you're going to want it. And therefore it wasn't if you didn't say, I want to be mevatel it, we assume that this is something that people wanted. And therefore it is would be asur on Pesach. Well, so what? Right? We're not worried. You hear me? We're not worried that you're going to eat chametz on Pesach, even though it's a good piece, right? So let's say you find this thing on the second day of Pesach, just be mevatel it. Say, I'm not interested. I'm mevatel it now. Why can't you be mafkir it at the time you find it? Why do you have to be mafkir it beforehand? Where am I? Says Gemara, because Dilma mishkachle the butter isura. We're afraid you're going to find it after the time of isur of chametz and lav birshutei kami. And there's a whole interesting rule, which I think we've discussed already, and we'll discuss throughout the Masechet, that because chametz is asur, once it becomes prohibited, it's not yours anymore. It's something the Torah said you can't own. You can't own something that the Torah said you're not allowed to own. And therefore, it's not yours to be mevatel, right? Now, even though it's not yours to be mevatel, lo matzi mevatel, you still are chayav against it, right? For having it. As Rabbi Elazar famously said, Shnei dvarim, there are two types of things. She'enam b'rshuto shel adam, v'asana katuv kilo b'rshuto. Two things which really you don't own, but the Torah punishes you and holds you accountable as if you did own it. Ve'elohein, bar b'rshut rabim, right? If you dig a ditch in the middle of the road, you don't own the road, but still, if the car drives into that, you're going to have to pay. So it's as if it was in your reshut. It's as if you caused the damage. So even though you don't clearly own it, and same thing is true about chametz. The same thing is true about chametz. Once you get to 6 hours and above, which we discussed already, that half of the Erev Pesach is asur and eating chametz. So from that time, you don't really own it, and therefore you can't be mevatel it. So you'd be really stuck. You'd find this chametz. It would be in your house, right? You don't own it, but it's as if you own it because it's not hefker. You can't be mevatel it, and you'll be over on the isur of bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. And so therefore, because of that rare situation, they wanted you to be mevatel your chametz at the time of your bedikat chametz.
Why don't you own it?
You don't want it because it's chametz.
Why don't you own it?
Oh, well, you don't own it because automatically the chazal, anything that's chametz, that's asur on Pesach, it's not yours. Like anything that you can't own.
Why do you have to mevatel it if it's automatically vital?
Because it's something that's not b'rshuto, but they made it kilo b'rshuto. So you have the worst of all worlds, right? So you can't sell it, for example. You can't do anything with it, right? You can't get enough from it. It's not worth any value to you. But they made it as if it's yours, and therefore you be chayav an isur midoraita, a bal yirah, bal yimatzeh. But because of that, you can't be mevatel. This is a big problem, right? This is why you can't be mevatel chametz on Pesach. It's a big problem.
But it leaves, why do you have to make it mevatel beforehand if it's by law, de jure?
Because this is what we just said. Even though it's not b'rshuto, they made it ki'ilu hu b'rshuto and you're chayav lo taseh. So therefore, you have to be mevatel before Pesach starts in order to avoid this issue, right? If you don't check well enough. Says well, okay, that's fine, but why are you doing it the night before? Why aren't you mevatel it the day of Erev Pesach, right? When you're burning your chametz, the last possible minute. V'niftalei ba'arba'ah or v'niftalei b'chamisha. Cancel, right? Say I don't want all my chametz at the 4th hour, the 5th hour. Says the Gemara. Well, the answer is that kivan de lavzman isuru, because it's not quite time that it's asur, which is 6 hours. Remember, V'lavzman bi'urahu, and it's not the time that you're doing bi'ur chametz, which here we mean b'digat chametz. So you're not looking for it at this time. We're worried dilma pasha v'lo mivatalai. We're afraid you'll forget, right? You're working Erev Pesach, you're baking, you're not doing anything, and you totally will forget, and you'll be in big trouble. Doesn't work, okay. But v'niftale b'shit. Remember, at the 6th hour is when you burn your chametz. So why can't you do it at the 6th hour? Because they are, well, it's too late. Because given the Isur Drabanan Elayo, since Midrabanan, remember the Rabbanan added an extra hour that you're not allowed to have it before, then Kidoraita Dami, it's already, even though it's Midrabanan, it's like it's Doraita and it's not yours. Velo Bershute Kaima, and you cannot lo matzi mevatel. You can't be mevatel it. Now, to be clear, you can destroy it, right? You can burn it and obviously get rid of it. And you can do that on Pesach too. But you can't be mevatel. Bittul is like saying, it's just saying words, saying, I want this to be hefker. And that you can't do. So you'd have to then burn it, which you could do, but it's not enough to be mevatel. And in fact, Amar of Gidol, Amar of Chia Bar Yosef, Amar Rav, Hamikadesh, if let's say a person goes to a woman, this is a fascinating halacha, right? A person goes and says, I want to marry you, will you marry me? With this loaf of bread, right? Which is chametz. So Mishay Shaot Lamala, Afilu Bechiti Kordanita, even if it's using Chiti Kordanita, Rashi says Chiti Kordanita are these I don't know how we would say them in English.
Mountain.
They're Kurdish.
Mountain. Okay, very difficult to machmitz.
Right. So they grow on this Hare Ararat, Rashi says, and they are very. I guess they have a big shell. So even if you get water on them, they don't ferment quickly, but eventually they will. And so even these things, ein choshishin likidushin. You're not choshish for the kiddushin, which, if you recall, is a crazy thing because it's only midrabanan that it's chametz. You went over to a person and from all technical halachic reasons, you were mekadesher with money, right? With something
Not a pruta, right?
worth more than a pruta. No. But because the chachamim said it's chametz, you can't have it, it becomes worthless. And so Rashi says this is an example of where the chachamim are basically overriding kiddushin, right? All kiddushin is done al dat the chachamim, and because it's an Isser Chachamim, you can't be Mekadesh a woman with this.
Could you Mekadesh somebody with a stolen object?
You cannot, because it's not yours.
If it's, but it can, if you steal it
And make a shinoi to it, yeah.
and then sell it.
You can be Mekadesh a woman with an Isser. It just, you can't be Mekadesh a woman with something that's not yours. That's, well, but then the question is whether it's value or not, right? You can't be Mekadesh a woman with, say, with Truma if she can't eat Truma, because there's no value.
No, but I'm
If
just,
she can eat Truma, then it does have value. And if there's Tovat Hana, right, we talk about this a lot in Kedusha. If there's value to her because she can give it to someone else, then as long as it's a pruta, you can do it.
Yeah.
Anyways, so that's where, I think this is where David got up to, or whoever did.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was all review we were waiting for James to come on. Well, says the Gemara now today, now, just before
Thank you for waiting.
Just in case you're confused about what we do, as you probably recall, we do Bitul Chametz, right? We say we're Mevatel both times, right? We do it at night and in the morning when you burn, right? And so there's a whole discussion in the Rishonim about where that comes from, because our Gemara rejected that, if you recall. But our Gemara was rejecting doing it in the morning only as opposed to the night, right? But the Rishonim added on that you might as well just do it both times, but you definitely should do it at night. And that's what our Gemara essentially requires. Ask the Gemara today. Now we're 6 lines from the top. Is it true that after the Zman that chametz is usher, you're not allowed to make it hefker, which is what I'm saying, to be mevatalet, say it's worthless. But Tanya, there's the following Breita. The Breita teaches how you're sitting down in Daf Yomi, and of course the second you sit down, you remember niskar sheyesh chametz b'toch beito. You remember that, oh my goodness, I have a donut, that's my favorite chametz, right? Sitting in my top drawer, hiding away. Says the Breita, mivatzlo b'libo, you should just be mevatel, make it hefker in your heart. You can't run it there for whatever reason. So just say, this is hefker. Of course, it's in your house, in your drawer, but you could say it's worthless to me. Kafar da'ara. Says the Breita, echad Shabbat v'echad Yom Tov, whether it's Shabbat morning or Yom Tov morning. Now, Bishlama Shabbat, I understand. You could say Mishkachet la kagon shechal arba asar liot b'Shabbat, right? I think it's this year, right? Are we close to this year? Or soon we have that. Where the 14th day is Erev Pesach every year, and it falls out on Shabbat. So Pesach is Sunday. right? So then Shabbat morning, you're in shul, and you remember that you have chametz. You're not going to make it home in time to burn it or eat it, right? I guess burning it's tricky. Flush it down the toilet or eat it. So you are mevatel it. But how about Yom Tov, right? Yom Tov by definition, once it's Pesach, it's usher already. And so it's batar isurahu. So how can you say you're mevatel b'libo? We just said you can't do such a thing once Yom Tov has started. Says the Gemara, well, it's you got the case wrong. Amar Vacha bar Yaakov, Hacha b'Talmud Yoshev b'fnei Rabbo Askinan. We're talking here about a student who is sitting in front of his teacher, and therefore it would be rude or very unpleasant for him to have to get up and make a quick exit, right? That's the addition of that detail. And Niskar Sheish Isa Migbugalat B'toch Beito. He remembers that he's got dough that's rising, or Migugal literally means turning, right? But it hasn't yet become chametz. I don't know what they did in old days, but he mixed some flour and water, ran outside to get the newspaper, bumped into the Rebbe, and started learning a little, and remembered, oh my gosh, I left the dough inside. It's rising. It's going to become chametz, but it's not chametz yet. And mityare shema tachmitz. He's worried that it will become chametz. So then says the Braita, kadim u'mevatil le'mikami detachmitz. Then he should say, I'm mevatel it before it becomes chametz. But because once it's chametz, it's too late. And says the in fact, ekanami dektane yoshev b'toch beit midrash shma mina. Right? It says you're sitting in the beit midrash. Otherwise, what's that detail adding? Right? If it wasn't that you were afraid to go somewhere, right? Clearly, the case is not you are at work and you remember you have chametz at home. The whole point is that if you could have gone home, you would have been able to stop it. But the reality is that because you're sitting in the Beit Midrash or you're in front of your Rebbe or whatever, you can't make it home in time, and because you don't want to leave, and therefore you're mevatel b'libo. Okay. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rabba Barafuna Amar Rav Hapat Sheifsha. Let's say you have bread. Not bread. You have well, I don't know how to translate pot. I'm going to say bread, but it doesn't mean bread. It means I guess we need a word. What would be a word that would include both matzah and chametz? I don't know. Okay, I'll say bread, but bread includes matzah here, right? So you have
nahama. Maybe use the Aramaic word nahama. Nahama can be matzah and can be lechem.
Okay, but so that's a good answer. So nahama, I don't know how to do that in English, but you have bread, let's say, but again, it's flour and water, and it's ifsha. It got moldy, right? So the problem is that you can't tell whether this is matzah or a chametz, because you can't tell anymore. The bread has lost its form, and obviously it's not talking about our matzah, which you can tell, which never becomes moldy. But second of all, you can tell. But it's talking about where you had matzah that was Yemenite kind of matzah, or matzah that had some depth to it and some some heaviness, and it became moldy. So you don't know if this is bread that became moldy or matzah that became moldy. Says Rabba Barafuna, in the name of Rav, Kivan sheravta matzah mutar. If there's more matzah, then it's mutar. Now, says what in the world? We think that means if the rest of the things in the box, right? You have a bread box, and the rest of it is more matzah than the moldy part, then it's okay because it goes after a majority.
It's okay to do what? To eat on Pesach or what?
Eat on Pesach.
Okay.
Let's Gemara 1 second. Hechidami. If you know that this was a piece of chametz that became moldy, so ki rafta matzah my hobby. Who cares? It could be 10 boxes of matzah. It's not. First of all, chametz is not batel. Second of all, they're separate anyways, right? So the fact that there's more matzah doesn't really change if it's chametz. Ella lo yadinam ba ichametzui matzah. Right. The point has to be, like I explained it, that you don't know if this piece of moldy bread was started off as chametz or started off as matzah. So it says, well, if that's the case, my area kirafta matzah. Why do you need to have a lot of matzah in the box for it to be mutar? Afilu kilo rafta matzah nami. Even if you have nothing else, right? Even if you find one piece in your bread box, again, poor choice of term, but in your matzah bread box, your matzah chametz box, and it's moldy, right? And you can't recognize what it is. Nezal butter batra. You should go after the last thing that was put in the box. Meaning, what did you put there yesterday? Because presumably, now we're making some assumptions here, but presumably people clean out their bread box, their leavened and unleavened bread box daily, right? Because if you leave things in there, they get moldy. Everyone knows that. So since it's something you clean out, you should just assume that whatever you find there was the most recent thing you put in there. And so if it's the first day of Pesach and what you put there yesterday was chametz, then you should assume it's chametz. And if it's the second day of Pesach or you made your matzah already, you should assume it's matzah. Milotznan, don't we have a Mishnah? This is a Mishnah in Shkolim, which is I guess we're going to learn Shkolim next. It's a Mishnah which teaches that if you find money, right? If you recall, every 2 out of every 3 years, right? You would take all the crops that you grew, and you would have Maaser Rishon, which you gave to the Levi, and then you would separate Maaser Sheni, which was another 10%, essentially 9%, and you would give it, you would keep it for yourself, but you can only use it in Yerushalayim, right? So assuming you had a nice sized farm, you would put aside a substantial amount of money that you would convert your crops into money, have to take that money up to Yerushalayim and use it there. Now, of course, it's very common that people would show up in Yerushalayim, as they do today, with a lot of money that they have to spend, and they would not spend it all, right? You'd have $1,000 to spend. You go out to eat as much as you can. You're ready to take your flight back, and you have $200 left behind, right? So it was very common, Rashi points out here, that people would give that money to locals, right? Or give it to their friends or people they met on the way, because that money is very little use to me until I come back to Yerushalayim again. If who knows, if I come back in 3 years or 5 years, like I'm not going to hold on to it. So there was a lot of money that was Maaser Sheni money floating around Yerushalayim. Says the Mishnah, let's say you're walking down the street and you're standing in front of a butcher shop and you find a $100 bill on the floor. Says the Mishnah, if you find money in front of the Suchrei Behema are not really butcher shops, it means the animal dealers, right? Because the most common thing you were supposed to do with Ma'ot Maaser Sheni was to buy an animal and bring a carbon shlamim and then eat it, right? So if you're in front of the animal seller and you find money, La'olam Maaser, you have to assume that money, which you can keep, right? Because assuming it has no markings, whatever, it's found money. You don't have to do Hashavat Aveda, but you have to assume it's Maaser. It's got Kedusha of Maaser, meaning you can only use it in Yerushalayim, right? Because, now, of course, it could be that a person dropped it. It could also be that the animal seller dropped it, right? And if the person who sells animals drops it, then it's not Maaser Sheni because you exchange the Maaser Sheni for this $100. It's $100. But we assume that it was dropped by the person buying animals, and therefore you have to treat it like Maaser. That's the Mishnah. Continues the Mishnah, the Harabayit Chulin. If you find $100 on the floor of Harabayit, then it's Chulin, because that's not where they sell animals. You can assume it's stam money, and most money is Chulin. Most money is not Maaser Sheni. So therefore you can use it for anything you want. If you find it in Yerushalayim, if you find it on the streets of Yerushalayim, then Bishat HaRegel, if it's during Chag, then you have to assume it's Maaser. Reason being that obviously people would travel up, a lot of tourists would come with lots and lots of Maaser money. And so the majority of money that's hanging around during the Chag is Maaser money. But if it's Bishar Yemot HaShana, Chulin, if you find it the rest of the year, so on a regular Monday, if you're walking down the streets of Yerushalayim and you find the $100, you can assume that it's Chulin. Now, why would it be different on Harabayit in the streets of Yerushalayim? So it explains the Gemara, B'amar of Shmaya Barzira, Shamay Barzira, my taima, why was the streets of Yerushalayim different than Harabayit? Ho'il v'shukei Yerushalayim asuyim etchabei b'chol yom. They used to sweep the streets of Yerushalayim every day. And since they sweep the streets of Yerushalayim every day, you have to assume that if you find a $100 bill, it wasn't there yesterday, it just came today. And so since it just came today, if today is the Chag, you have to assume it's Maaser money. If today is Chol, meaning not Chag, then you assume it's not Maaser money. In the Harabayit, which they never swept a lot, Rashi explains it's because, I think Rashi explains, someone explains that, sorry, I don't know if Rashi, someone explains.
Is money being used on Yom Tov?
No, maybe Chol HaMoed, or you put it aside, right?
If the streets are swept daily, you find it on Yom Tov. What does that mean?
No, so it means they were swept the day before. right?
Can you even pick it up on Yom Tov? I don't understand the whole question.
You can pick it up, but you could stand there till the night and then pick it up after the night.
My second question is, if it's on Har Bayit, why couldn't you say it's a Maaser Rishon? Belongs to one of the Kohanim.
No. What's it? Maaser Rishon goes to Leviim. You mean Truma? But
Truma, yeah.
But they don't remember the Truma has nothing to do with Yerushalayim. Kohanim can eat Truma anywhere. Let's say in Eretz Yisrael, right? So the fact that it's in the city of Yerushalayim is where people brought their Maaser Sheni because that's where you have to eat it. Again, I'm not sure if it's in Rashi. I don't have time to look for it quickly, but someone said, I think it's one of the Rishonim says that the reason is that maybe it is Rashi, that they would sweep the streets of Yerushalayim because they were filthy. But Har Bayit was generally clean, so they didn't need to sweep it every day, right? There wasn't dirt and dust and animal parts and all. I guess there was in Har Bayit, but not as much.
But why not think it might belong to a Kohen and it has Kedusha, and therefore you couldn't use it?
So you go after majority, right? It's true that there certainly is some money that is Kodesh, but the majority of people coming to Har Bayit, the majority of wallets have Chulin money. And so you can assume in Har Bayit that you go after the majority. However, what we're learning
Rashi says that.
Rashi says, okay, thank you. Well, we're right. I remember Rashi describes the Har Bayit is on a hill, and it's very windy, and therefore things blow away. I'm not sure Rashi obviously
people take the dust off of their shoes. He says,
right. That's another halakha. I don't think Rashi, probably never saw Har Bayit, but nonetheless, he describes it, right? But either way, the point we're learning from here is that in a place where you clean something out every day, let's say the streets of Yerushalayim, then you have to assume that what you find is the most recent thing. So now, why don't you say, Alma, continues the Gemara, Amrinan kamai azlile, the earlier things that were there went away, meaning they were cleaned out, and therefore by the bread box, which is both leavened and unleavened bread, you should say, Hachanami, Nema, kama azo, whatever you find right now is from today. And obviously, if you find this on Pesach, no one's making bread that's leavened on Pesach. So it must be matzah, must be unleavened bread that you found in your bread box. So what does it have to do with ravta alav matzah? That there's more matzah. You don't need more matzah. You should go after what's most recent. This is where it's true that generally you would go after what's most recent. But shani hacha tiifusha mochiachala. This is moldy, and so by definition, it's telling you this is very old. And since the mold is telling you that it's old, you have to assume that maybe it's 5 days old and it's chametz. Well, then why? What's the question? If the mold tells you that it must be chametz, so kirafta matzah ma'afi. So who cares again if there's a lot of matzah? The fact that there's a lot of matzah does not get rid of the fact that there's chametz there. It says Rabba, you misunderstood the whole Braita. It didn't mean lo tema, not the Braita, the statement. It didn't mean shiravta matzah, that there's a lot of matzah. Elaima shiravu yemei matzah ilave. There are many days of matzah, meaning if many days of Pesach have passed, then it's reasonable to say that this moldy bread is matzah that became moldy because there's been 5 days of Pesach, right? If it's only 1 day of Pesach, then this moldy piece of dough has to be bread, and otherwise it wouldn't be moldy. Iachi pshita, okay, so I can figure that out. I mean, it's not so obvious, that's pretty obvious. It's very moldy. And even though it's the 5th or 6th day of Pesach, since it's very moldy, igla milta devade chametz ma'alyahu, it must be that it's chametz because this looks like it's 3 weeks old, right? And so it's got to be chametz. Kamash malan the kivan sherabu yemei matzah ilave amina kol yuma v'yuma nama chamima afa. There's the word nama, right? You say that every day they baked fresh bread. So basically, this might be a piece of matzah that was left over from Erev Pesach, so it's matzah. You put it in the corner of the bread box, you forgot about it, you didn't reach that far. Every day you bake some fresh matzah, you put it in the box, the heat, right? Chamima, nama chamima afa, v'shadei alave, and you threw it on top of this little piece, the afshatfei, and it made it more and more moldy because of the heat and the humidity and the moisture, and therefore it's possible that it would still be matzah, and that's why it's permitted. Says the Gemara, Mias Lina Batar Batra, is it true that you always go after the last thing? But Tanya, we have another Braita, which says the following. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, let's say you have a teva. Let's say you have a safe in your house, and you use it alternatively, presumably, well, you can't use it at the same time, but sometimes you put in your maaser money, Sometimes you put in your chulin money, and presumably you wrap them up or you mark them or you keep a ledger, right, of what's what. But you find money there and you don't remember what it's from. So im says the Braita, im rov chulin, if most of what you used in the box is chulin, then it's chulin. Im rov maaser, maaser. If most of what is there is maaser, go after the majority. Why? Amai, lezo batar batra, right? So again, Rashi makes the assumption that a money box is something you clean out every time frequently, right? Because you want to, again, you're using it for money that's chulin, which you can use for anything, and money that's maaser, which you can only use in Yerushalayim. So you have to know what's what. So you clean it out frequently. So why does it matter if you mostly use this safe for chulin? You should go after the last thing you use it for. If the last time you put something in the safe was maaser, then money you find in the safe should be maaser, and vice versa for chulin. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, okay, you're right. It's talking about where you don't remember. You don't know what you used both. Like I said, you don't remember which one you used most recently, and therefore you go after the majority, right? Rav Zvid Amar, it's talking about where you use the money that was wrapped up, tzibur, like right. It's in packets, meaning that you use them both at the same time. And so you put your maaser money in one corner of the safe, you put your chulin money in another corner of the safe, you wrap them up very nicely, you ended up using your money. 3 months later, you come and you find $100 in the safe. You don't have no idea which corner it was from. So there, you can't go after the last thing because you used it for both most recently. And Rav Papa Amar Kigon Bishtakich Beguma. Papa says, let's say you find it in a crack, right, in a hole. So your safe has a hole somewhere in the bottom where it's likely that you put many things on top of that hole. So even though you cleaned it out every time, you didn't reach into this crack, right? And therefore, it's very likely that this money is there from 5 years ago, and you can't rely on the last thing. But in general, again, if you have something that you clean out regularly, you don't have to worry about rove. You can go after what was there last and assume what's there now was the last thing you put there.
I'm surprised that they let you make assumptions for chametz, because like the isser of eating chametz on Pesach is so severe, right? We're owning it, that you would think that when in any doubt, don't touch it.
I mean, the first thing you said is definitely true. The isser of chametz is very severe. And as we're going to see, and probably have already seen, we have a rule that chametz is not batel, right? So
Right.
if you have one drop of chametz in not many things,
Right,
it's not batel.
right.
But that's not the same as saying that if you have a suffix that something chametz or not, you go with the rove like you always do, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so again, I mean, but look, that's true about many things, right? So eating non-kosher meat or basar b'chalav, same thing is true, right? If it's a rove, you go with the rove. Again, bittul is a different thing, but you always go with it. Not
Okay.
always.
Does it make a difference here? We're talking about moldy, that it's not edible?
No, so that's a point I tried to not to talk about, but no, because if it's not edible, then there's no problem at all. Then it doesn't matter if it's chametz or not chametz, right? If it's not ra'ui la'achilat kelev, which we'll talk about. But they're making the assumption in this Gemara that moldy is not a barrier to eating something, right?
מעניין, it's interesting that no one raising דבר שיש לו מתירין, אפילו באלף לא בטל. האם אפשר, maybe here we can project it, you think?
Well, so chametz does not have matirin.
No, דבר on the same rationale, if we can see, because you try to, דבר שיש לו מתירין, you try to find heter here because of doubt. And you try to, because the most recent or halot, whatever, and they try to find, so to speak, not to make it chametz. Right?
Right.
Yeah, that was Hanan's question, I think, right? It seems like we're trying too hard.
Okay, all right.
Okay, let's continue. Very practical Gemara. Says Rav Yehuda Habodek, the person who does bedigat chametz tzarich sheyivarich. They need to make a bracha, right? Now, the first question, of course, everyone's going to ask is, what's the chiddush? Of course, you make a bracha. You make a bracha every time you do a mitzvah. So I think the Rush makes the point that you might have thought that bedigat chametz is not a mitzvah because, well, it's not a mitzvah midoraita, but you might have thought it's not even a mitzvah midrabanan because it's just a method to get rid of your chametz. But in fact, says Rabbi Yehuda, you got to make a bracha on it. Now, what my mivarech? So what's the bracha? Rav Papi Amar Mishmei de Rava, you say livaer chametz, right? I am doing biur chametz. Rav Papa Amar Mishmei de Rava, that was Rav Papi. Rav Papa says, al biur chametz, on biur chametz. Now, we're going to get to this, we're going to discuss this in the next, 15, 20 minutes, but you'll recall that very often we make brachot on mitzvot. We sometimes use the terminology al, like al achilat matzah, right? And very often we use the terminology li, right? Likrot tatev b'tzitzit, let's say, or leshev basukah, right? So those are two different terminologies that we use for mitzvah. Here the machloka between Rav Papi and Rav Papa is which one to use for biur chametz, right? Or really b'dikat chametz, but we say biur chametz. Rashi says biur just means b'dika. Other Rishonim say that you say biur because you're going to do, like we learned earlier today, you're going to do a bittul right after you finish b'dika, and so that's considered biur. Either way, says the Gemara, bil liv va'er, last line, right? To say the words lamed, liv va'er, everyone agrees that that's a good terminology because it means I'm going to do it, right? And you do it, you make the bracha before you do the mitzvah. Kibligi, the question is al biur. If you say al biur, which that sounds, Mar Savar, Papi is of the opinion, according to the Argirsa, that meikar mashma. It sounds like I'm making a bracha to Hashem for what I already did. Al biur chametz, because I destroyed the chametz. On the biur of chametz, right? Umar Savar, but Rav Papa says, and therefore you can't say it because you can't make a bracha for the past when you haven't done it yet. Umar Savar, but Rav Papa holds lahaba mashma, that in fact it means the future on what I'm going to do, and therefore you're allowed to say it. So that's the machlok. Now, mate,
Same thing. Al achilat matzah. We haven't eaten it yet.
it's true. Let's keep going. Meitve. So ask the Gemara, let me ask you from the following Breita. The Breita says, Baruch asher kedishana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al hamilah. When you do a brit milah, you say al hamilah, which is your question, right? Says the Gemara, what do you mean al hamilah?
You haven't done it. Right.
What?
You haven't done it yet, right?
Haven't done it yet. You make a bracha before you do, like almost every mitzvah, right? Make a bracha before you do it. So how, according to Rav Papi, how could you say al hamilah if al hamilah implies that you already did the brit milah? Says no. Hatam hechanem. I don't get it. What would you say? You would say nema limol to do the brit milah. You can't say that because that implies that you have to do it. That you have to do the brit milah. I am commanded to do the brit milah. But lo sagi lavu mayo. You're just the mo. They're paying you $100. What if you don't do it, or whatever they pay a mo? I'm not familiar, but whatever they pay them all. But if you don't do it, someone else will do it, right? So it's not something you have to do. So therefore, you can't say it because it implies I am commanded to do this. I'm not commanded to do this. I'm doing my job. I could do it, but I don't have to. So, okay, but the father of the kid has to do it. Avia ben ma'ikil meimar. What about if the father, because the mitzvah of brit milah is on the parents, on the child's father. So if the father should do it, why the father could say limol, says Rav Papi, that's what he would say. That if the father of the son did the brit milah, he would say asher kedeshana mitzvotav v'tzivanu limol et beno, or limol, whatever you say, to do brit milah. It's only because the person doing it doesn't have that requirement. He's a moel that we say al hamilah. Okay, so clearly b'diavad you can do it, right? So clearly you could say that language, but it's not ideal. Okay, let's ask another question. Meitve, it says in the Breita.
If you don't mind, just pay attention. The bracha, what we say the bracha today is only coined much later. It's a Baruch Asher Kedisham. En kan Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. That's what coined much later.
Which words are you talking about, though?
Huh?
What do you mean?
Look. Asher Kedisham Tzivanu Ala Milah. Nachon?
Yeah.
אנחנו יודעים the bracha was developed in stages. It was not originally ברוך אתה השם אלוקינו מלך העולם.
You're cutting in and out. We're not hearing it. So
He's talking about Ata Melech Haolam.
Okay.
That we don't have those words in the brachot.
In the other Moraim part until they coined the bracha of today.
Sorry, we missed some of it. I think
I'm pointing at very, very interesting point. We still did not coin the brachot the way we send them today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Continues the Braita, the same thing. Meitzvei. Another Braita says, Baruch Asher Kisham Mitzvotav Etzivanu Ala Shchita. Says the Gemara. How could you Ala Shchita? Again, you're doing it presumably before you shech the animal, right? So how could you make a bracha Ala Shchita before you shech the animal if Ala Shchita implies that you already did the Shchita? Says the Gemara, the same reason. Hatanami Hechanema. What should you say? Lishchot. God commanded me to shech this animal. You don't have to shech an animal. Don't eat meat, right? So or someone else could shecht it, right? It's not, there's no mitzvah to do shchita. Someone, for me, there's a mitzvah maybe. There's a mitzvah for me to do shchita. There's more, okay, but Pesach b'kachim Michael Mimra. There are carbonot that you have to do. You have to do a carbon Pesach. You have to bring kachim. There's a huge debate what kachim means here. But let's just say there are kachim that you have to do. It says, maybe in fact, you would also say lishchot when you have to do it. And it's only because you don't have to do it that you say al hashchita, right? Says where, okay, next another Braita, Meitzvei. The Braita says in Sukkah, if you make your lulav, meaning you bind up your lulav, nevarech shechiyanu v'kimanu v'kiyanu l'zman hazeh. We don't do this nowadays, but anyways, that's what the Braita says. Not well, you pick up your lulav to use it. Omer asher kedishanu mitzvotav etzivanu al netilat lulav. What do you mean al netilat lulav? That implies that it says you already did it, right? So again, it's a question. How can you say al netilat lulav? It says shani hatam dibeidna da'agba nafik bey. No, because there you already, once you pick up the lulav before you make the bracha, you're really already yotzei. And so when you make the bracha, you already did it, and that's why you say al netilat lulav, because according to Rav Papi, al netilat means you already did it, and in fact you already did it. Yachi, why was it right to say if you pick it up, let's seitbo, you picked it up to use it? You already did it. It's true. You're right. In fact, when you pick up your lulav, you did the lulav, then you make the bracha, which is not the way we do most mitzvot. The reason we use the terminology of latseitbo is we shouldn't avoid the mitzvah seifa, because we wanted to learn in the next part of the Braita that if you're leishev basukah, right, then you're going to be yotzei in the sukkah. So that's when you make the bracha. Tanareishanami latseitbo. The Ktani seifa. What is the seifa? The seifa says, you build a sukkah. So again, Omer, you should say, again, we don't do this, but whatever, it's complicated. Why? But says the Braita, you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Shechayanu, we're evolving here, right? Baruch Atah Hashem, Shechayanu v'kimanu v'kiyanu l'zman hazeh. When you build it. Now, we generally, again, the halacha usually is that you include, we don't say a separate Shechayanu, and you include it when you make Shechayanu on the first night of Chag, in the mitzvah of Sukkah. Anyways, nichnas leishevbo, you're going now to sit in your sukkah. Then Omer Baruch Asher Kishem Tzulav Tzivanu leishev basukah, and so there is where you say leishev basukah. So according to all these answers of Rav Papi, you really should never say al something, right? Al mitzvat, whatever, or al biur chametz, because that implies lisha'avar. If you're stuck, if you can't say the affirmative liva'er, because it's not your mitzvah or something, that's where you're allowed to say it. And Hilchata says the Gemara that is wrong. Really what you should say is al biur chametz. Now there's, very interestingly, I'll do this in 2 minutes maybe, because I want to finish the daf, but there are Rishonim, it's quoted in the Rush quotes the Rivaz saying this, the Ran says it as well, who basically say that this principle of our Gemara is how we determine when to say bracha of al or lit, right? So that if something can be done by a shliach, if something can be done by someone else for you, you say al. And if you have to do it yourself, you say lit, right? So for example, litatif batzitzit, right? So you have to put on tzitzit, someone else cannot put on tzitzit for you. So you say lamed, or tefillin, or leishev basukah, right? You can't ask someone to sit in the sukkah for you. The things that someone else in theory could do for you, you say al. So tefillin is a very complicated part, because tefillin you say both. So let's stick away out of tefillin for a second. So James has many questions on that approach. Many other people have questions on that approach as well. The Rush is very bothered by the mitzvah by al achilat matzah, right? Because how in the world can someone else eat matzah for you? Or al achilat maror. So he says that the Riva actually said a different bracha. The Riva said le'achol matzah and le'achol maror. And then in fact, they would change a lot of the brachot. they quote, again, one can look at this and go through many, many brachot where this comes up. The Rush doesn't like it, and Rush quotes Rabbeinu Tam. And the Rush quotes in the name of Rabbeinu Tam that when the distinction in making brachot is if the act you're going to do is going to be done immediately, then you say li, to do it. If it's a longer act, then you say al mitzvah. So for example, he gives many examples, but lehaniach tefillin. Sorry, that's the wrong example. So I said, I think backwards. Li is to do something that you're going to engage in doing it, and al is when you do it at a one-time thing, right? So al achilat matzah and al achilat maror, you're eating it and you're done with it. Leishev basukah is the mitzvah of sitting in a sukkah, which is not a 1-second mitzvah. You do it all day. Lehaniach tefillin, the Rabbeinu Tam quotes, you're putting on tefillin, or litatif batzitzit, you're wearing the tzitzit and tefillin all day, and therefore you say lamed, right? Al bedigat or al biur chametz, because you're doing biur chametz right away. He brings many, many examples. Some of them fall apart. We make a bracha l'shmoa kol shofar, right? So it's a lamed. So Rabbeinu Tam says it's because really you don't fulfill the mitzvah right away. You have to hear the kolot during musaf, right, or during Amidah. So because it's a long mitzvah, you say a lamed, but you would say an al if you're doing it right away, and it's an action that you just do right then. Of course, there are many, many questions. How long becomes a question? James raised the point of tefillin. Tefillin is much more complicated because we say 2 brachot in our tefillin, and we say both, right? You say al and you say le. With that, right? With the laniach, thank you. Tefillin, and then you say on tefillin shalosh al mitzvah tefillin, right? So the Rishonim say that's there. You have 2 brachot, so we want them to be different. So we picked one of each. So that's sort of the answer given over there.
Yeah, but it makes sense that the first one would be first, the active voice, I think.
Perhaps. So it's a very interesting thing, but it does turn out that among the Rishonim, there were a lot of debates as to what bracha you made for many different mitzvot. From our Gemara, it comes out that for biur chametz, you can do either one, but the halacha is that you should do, which is what we do, al biur chametz, not levaer chametz. Anyways, let us keep going before, because we can't go all day, but I just wanted to raise that issue, and I think it's fascinating. Continues the Gemara, but the Kuli Alma, everybody agrees, despite the whole debate we just had, Mia me'ikar be'ina nevruchi, that you always make a bracha before you do the mitzvah, right? The question is, do the words al bior mean the past or the future? But everybody agrees that you should say the bracha before you do bior chametz. Minoa. How do you know that? Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, kol ha-mitzvot mevarech alein over l'asiyatan. You always make, I'll have to get back to you, James, but let's keep going. Kol ha-mitzvot mevarech alein over l'asiyatan. You always make a bracha before you do the mitzvah. My mashma, where do you see that? How do you know that? I'm sorry, well, my mishvah over, listen dak dumehu. How do you know that over l'asiyatan means before you do something? Amar Nachman Yitzchak, Amar Krav, Yaretz achimatz derech hakikar, vaya'avor takushi. We're talking there in Shmuel. That Achimatz ran and he overtook, right? He went in front of the kushi, and there you see you go in fronting of something or before something is vaya'avor. Abaya Amar Mehacha, Abaya is another example from next week's parsha, right? Who avar lifneihem, with Yaakov. Yaakov went in front of his shluchot, his messengers to get to Esau. There's another pasuk by Yavar Malkam Lefneim Hashem Barosham. Hashem, that the king went in front of them. Again, the king, of course, goes in front of the people, and Hashem Barosham. Bei Rav Amri. Now, in addition to this principle that you always make a bracha on a mitzvah before you do it, in Bei Rav they said there's exceptions. Chutz min tefillah, except when you go to the mikvah, and shofar,
right.
and shofar. So bishlama tefillah, where do I get tefillah? The kati gavra lo chazi. By tefillah, the person who's going to the mikvah is not able to make a bracha. Rashi says something here which all the Rishonim seem to argue with, that we're talking about a balkari, right? And the rule is that a person who sees semen or who has intercourse is not supposed to learn Torah or daven. We learned in brachot about this, right? And therefore, you don't really want to make a bracha before you go to the mikvah. All the Tosfos here, but many Rishonim disagree with this strongly, and say that it's not talking about that at all. And in fact, we're very makel on that, and people make brachot when they're balkari, but it's talking about a ger. It's talking about a convert. And so before they go into the mikvah, they're not Jewish yet. And so they can't make a bracha, asher kedushanim tzvatav etzivanu al ha-tfilah, right? which is the bracha they make, if they haven't become Jewish yet. And so it's impossible, right? Gavar lo chazi. Ella shofar. What about the shofar? My taima. Why do you have to make a bracha on the shofar after you hear it? The chitema mishum doma mikalkala tki'ah. Maybe it's because, as we all know, sometimes the Baal Tokeh is not so good, and they can't do it. And so you make the bracha, and then you mess it up. But you should worry about that by every mitzvah. Yachi, afilo shchita, mila nam, you might mess it up, unfortunately, right? El amar of chista, chutz minat tefillah bilvad. Forget about shofar. With shofar, you make the bracha before, which is, of course, what we do. The only exception is tefillah, and itmar, in fact, tayinami hachi, Talval, the Allah, if the Braita says if you go to the mikvah, and again, according to Tosfot and all the other Rishonim I saw, is referring to tefillah of a ger, and then Allah, and you go up, Baliyato Omer, Baruch Asher Kishan Mitzvotav V'tzivanu al HaTfilah, because you couldn't have done that before. Okay? Now, again, there are many, not many things. There's some other mitzvot that we make a bracha after we do them, and the Rishonim start discussing them. For example, Netilat Yadayim, which is an important question. So, which comes up, we make a bracha after we wash our hands. This is a very famous one that comes up. There are Rishonim who say, I don't think Rashi says it here, but others who say that's because you're generally washing your hands in the morning when you wake up and they're dirty and you already maybe are Balkari or whatever, and you're not supposed to make a bracha. So you can't make the bracha before you wash your hands. So you have to wash them first and then make the bracha. And because in the morning we do it that way all the time. Anyways, that's one answer. The other answer, of course, that we're all familiar with is that the niguv, the drying of the hands, is part of washing them. And so most people are very makbid to make the bracha before they dry their hands. Right? You wash them, you make the bracha, and then you dry them because they're still in the process of washing them. Either way, there are many, many other cases, but let's continue because we're going to try to finish the daf. Continue the Mishnah on Ar Larba Asar, your bodek for chametz, said the Mishnah L'or Haner, using candlelight. Minani Mili, how are you supposed to use a candle? Amar Chista, because we learned from a various succession of psukim, the Manu Mitzia Mimi Mitzia, we compare Mitzia, which of course it says by chametz, right? That you shouldn't, Shirat Yamim Sar Lo Yimatzeh, you shouldn't find chametz in your house. We learned that from the word Mitzia used in another context. And that Mitzia we compare to the word Chipus, which means to search. The Chipus mi-Chipus, we learned that from another context, the Chipus mi-Neirot, where we see that searching, again, we're going to quote all these psukim in a minute, is done in the context of candles. And they wrote ner. Now, where do we see all these things? Mitzia mi-Mitzia, the word Mitzia, from another word Mitzia, it says by Pesach, by Matzah, by Chometzari, Shivat Yamim Sari Lo Yimatzeh, we use the word, you won't find it. Tivhatam. Now it says, this is by Yosef, by Yosef's people. By Yechapes, they searched for the cup, right? Begadol hachal bekaton kala, by Yimatzeh. So you have the word mitzia there, right? They found it, but you have the word chipus in the same pasuk. And mitzia mechipus today. So from that same pasuk, we learned that yitzia, that finding something, is similar to the word chipus. And we find the chipus minerot, it says in the Navi, Be'eta hi achapes et Yerushalayim ban-nerot. Right? God says, I will search through Yerushalayim with candles. Right? This is in Sefania. And so you see that searching involves candles. And nerot miner, dichtiv, ner Hashem nishmat adam. The ner of God is the soul. Chofes kol chadre baten. You search all the hidden parts of the person. Tanaber Rabbi Yishmael. In fact, Rabbi Yishmael quoted this in another way. Leila Yudalet, on the night of the 14th, meaning Erev Pesach, Bodkin et hachametz l'araner. You search for chametz using a candle, and continues Rabbi Yishmael in the Braita. Afal pishein raya l'davar. It's not a clear proof, but zeich l'davar. There's a remez to this thing. Shenemar, and he quotes the whole thing. Shivat yamim sar lo yimatzeh, and then it says chapes b'gadol achal b'katan kala. And it says vayimatzeh, so you find the word mitzia and chipus together. V'omer be'eta hi achapes et Yerushalayim ban-nerot. V'omer ner Hashem nishmat adam chofes kol chadre baten. My v'omer, what's the last part? What are you adding? Right, you already said that you used that Hashem looked with the ner. So what are you adding? V'chitema hai be'eta hi kulahu. Maybe when Sefania says that achapes et Yerushalayim ban-nerot, what God was saying is, I'll look with a candle, meaning with a bad light, right? Because I'm not looking so well. I don't want to find all your sins. And so you might think it's a kuladam rachmana. Lo particularly Yerushalayim ben nehura da avuka. I'm not going to use a torch, meaning a bright light. Dinafish Nuhura Tuva, Ella Benuhura Deshraga, I'll use a little wick. The Zutar Nuhura Tfei, the Avan Rabba Mishtakeach, Avan Zutar Lo Mishtakeach. I'll find, obvious sinners, but I don't want to look too well. God doesn't want to be bodek too deeply into our masim. So that was what you might think. Continues the word, that's wrong. Tashma, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, and the end of the pasuk is Chofes Kol Chadre Batan. God is using the Ner to search deeply, and you're supposed to use a Ner on Erev Pesach to search deeply. And Tanur Rabbanan, let's read a few more lines just because it's the same thing. It says the Braita Ein Bodkin Lola Arachama. You can't check using the sunlight. And you're going to ask me in a second how it could be sunlight at night, but we'll get there. The Lola Ara Levana, you can't use the moonlight. Again, remember, Erev Pesach is a full moon, right? The Lola Ara Avuka, you can't use a torch. Ella La'ar Haner, you can only use a candle. Nipnei, says the Braita, She'ar Haner Yafel Lebedika, because a candle is good for checking. Even though we don't have a clear proof that you need to use a candle, there is a Zecher Ledavar, as we just quoted twice. Shenemar, Shivat Yamim Sarli Matei Batechem, Vomer Chabes Begadol Echel Bekatani Kala, Vomer Beitahi Chabes Yerushalayim Bnei Rod, Vomer Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, Chofes Kol Chadre Baten. So you see from the same Braita that there's a Zecher that you're supposed to use a Ner specifically and not any other kind of light, including natural light or an avuka, which is a torch, which is a much, torch is generally a bunch of cloth put together, but it's a much brighter light. Now, we can do a couple more lines, right? Yes or no? Keep going. Ask the Gemara, hi orachama hechidami. What do you mean orachama? How in the world do you get orachama? Right? So clearly it's talking about the day. And it's talking about where you didn't check at night and you wake up in the morning and you got to check. So, but where is the sun going to come in? You're talking about your courtyard. You don't have to clean out your courtyard for chametz. You got birds coming all the time. So if there's any pieces of bread on the ground, the birds will take care of it. You don't have to clean it up, right? The animals will come. Ela bak sadra must be talking about your portico, as we discussed in Erevin, which is encased. And so it's not easy for birds to get there, but the sun can get there and you can use it. So that's where Rava, but Rava told us, you can use the sun. In fact, a portico is wide open. You can see clearly. You're talking about a window. You can't, let's say you have a windowsill, you can't check in the window with the sun. As for why not? Where in this window? If you're talking about right in front of the window, if the sun is there, you can check with the sun. We're talking about the sides, right? So it gets shadowy over there. And even though it's a bright sun and you think you can see, the shadows cause you not to be able to see. And the Braita says you can't use the sun for that. You have to use a candle. Tomorrow, we will discuss why you can't use a torch, which seems to be a better form of light than a candle.
What's the answer? Why the sun? I thought you'd set night. So what I don't.
No, we're saying if you didn't do it at night, remember we said you have to keep checking even during the day.
Okay, I got it. All right.
That's what we're talking about. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. Very exciting daf. We'll see you tomorrow morning, hopefully at 7:30. 7:30.
Right. Okay.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Shavua Tov, thank you for having us yesterday. How are you doing, Yerucham? We need the key for Debbie apartment house. Leonardo. And did you take the package for you? I told you. No, so that's exactly what I'm reminding you. If you bring the key, you take the package. How are you doing otherwise? How's your Shabbat? Baruch Hashem. We had a very nice time with the Rosenbaum. We were there. We were outside. The beginning, I said only with my shirt and sweater. Then I put a jacket. Then I put my coat. As the day advanced, it was so cold. Yeah. Okay. Yofi. Regard to Stephanie. And you have heard from the kids? Oh my God. כל הכבוד, אבל שתהיה לי בריא, אתה צריך לשמור על עצמך. שבוע טוב. משוגעים, משוגעים. I'm going to read that with you tomorrow. I'm going to read that with you tomorrow. The key for the house. Okay, thank you. We should have everyone gets it for me. Therefore, it's I'll give you 20 minutes as usual. Can I help you? What happened?
Video. Hello, Margot. Shavua Tov.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Pretty good.
Yeah. How's your son feeling?
He's kind of tired, and let's say he's 80 to 90%. You know, 80 to 90% himself, which is not bad. Right? Yeah. By the way, he called, what do you call it? He called MJ, I think a week ago, just to touch base with him. And I'm not sure he left a message on that. How was your Shabbat? she able to, I know she loves to cook. Yeah.